Our story begins in a time so distant that it's almost unimaginable, around 3 billion years ago. At that point, life as we know it didn't exist. Instead, we were merely tiny atoms floating in the primordial soup of the world.
These humble beginnings set the stage for an extraordinary journey through time. Fast forward to roughly 6 million years ago, and we see the emergence of the first hominids, a group of primates that would eventually give rise to humans. Among them, around 1.9 million years ago, Homo erectus made history as the first species to venture out of Africa, spreading across different parts of the globe. Unlike their primate ancestors, Homo erectus had significantly larger brains, a development that would prove crucial in the story of human evolution. As time marched on, about 400,000 years ago, the first evidence of Neanderthals appeared. These early humans were remarkably well adapted to the cold climates of Europe and Western Asia, with their bodies evolving to survive in such harsh environments. Their facial features were strikingly similar to our own, making them one of the most human-like species before us. Eventually, we, Homo sapiens, emerged as the sole surviving members of the hominid family. But the question remains, how did our species, Homo sapiens, rise to become the dominant force on the planet? The answer lies in the development of civilization, a phenomenon that set us apart from all other species. Our journey into civilization begins in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia around 4000 BCE. Situated between the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers, this region was home to the Sumerian city of Uruk. Unlike their ancestors, who relied on hunting and gathering, the people of Uruk developed a groundbreaking method of harvesting cereal grains, such as wheat and barley. However, transforming these grains into edible food required significant effort. Initially, they used a hand mill, a simple yet ingenious invention consisting of 2 stones. By grinding the grains between these stones, they produced flour, which was then collected and stored for later use. This labor-intensive process marked the dawn of agriculture, a monumental shift that enabled humans to create their own food sources rather than relying solely on the whims of nature. This agricultural revolution allowed Uruk to flourish, growing into a thriving city with a population exceeding 50,000. However, this transformation also had a profound impact on the human body. The average height of men decreased from 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 3 inches, while women shrank from 5 feet 3 inches to 5 feet 0 inches. The once athletic hunter-gatherers became smaller, less physically imposing farmers, confined to their land and dependent on the crops they grew. This shift not only changed their physical stature but also redefined what it meant to be human. Around 3000 BCE, according to legend, King Gilgamesh began his reign as a Sumerian ruler. His story, immortalized in one of the world's earliest literary works, the Epic of Gilgamesh, tells of his quest for immortality. In the epic, Gilgamesh encounters a wise traveler named Utnapishtim, who recounts a tale of a great flood sent to destroy the world. Despite his quest, Gilgamesh ultimately learns a profound truth. Life, which you look for, you will never find. For when the gods created man, they let death be his share and life withheld in their own hands. This realization reflects the inevitability of mortality, a theme that resonated deeply in ancient societies. By the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, the Sumerians had been overthrown by the Akkadians, with Sargon the Great rising to power and unifying the region under his rule. Meanwhile, in the Indus Valley, located in what is now modern-day Pakistan, a new civilization was taking shape. The Indus Valley Civilization, which thrived from 3300 to 1300 BCE, is particularly notable for its advanced sanitation systems. Their toilets featured seats and chutes leading to an underground drainage system, with waste carried away from homes through a network of covered drains. This innovative approach to waste management not only kept the cities clean and hygienic, but also prevented the spread of disease, showcasing the ingenuity of this ancient society. While the people of the Indus Valley focused on sanitation, the ancient Egyptians were consumed with the construction of monumental pyramids. In Egyptian belief, the afterlife was a continuation of the physical world, where a deceased pharaoh would continue to rule and be worshipped for eternity. To ensure their journey to the afterlife, pharaohs were mummified, a process designed to preserve their physical form. Their pyramids were filled with offerings and treasures intended to provide for them in the afterlife. The construction of these pyramids was of utmost importance to the pharaohs, as they sought to achieve immortality in the eyes of their people. The tradition of pyramid building began with Pharaoh Djoser, 2667 to 2648 BCE, who constructed the step pyramid at Saqqara. This was followed by Pharaoh Sneferu, 2613 to 2589 BCE, who built several pyramids, including the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid. However, it was Pharaoh Khufu, 2589 to 2566 BCE, who left an indelible mark on history by building the Great Pyramid of Giza, a marvel of engineering that took 20 years to complete. Even today, this massive structure continues to inspire awe and wonder. Khufu was succeeded by pharaohs Khafre and Menkaure, who constructed the second and third pyramids at Giza, though these were slightly smaller than the Great Pyramid. While the Egyptians were building their monumental pyramids, a new era was dawning in China around 2100 BCE with the rise of the First Chinese dynasty. Much like the people of Mesopotamia, the Chinese were deeply reliant on agriculture, cultivating rice, wheat, barley, and other crops to sustain their growing population. This agricultural foundation would eventually support the development of one of the world's most enduring civilizations. As the story goes, the Yellow River, known as China's sorrow for its unpredictable and devastating floods, was both a lifeline and a threat to the people of ancient China. The river, stretching over 5,400 kilometers, is one of the cradles of Chinese civilization, but its mighty waters could turn from a source of sustenance into a cause of destruction in an instant. When the river flooded, it submerged vast areas of farmland, destroying crops and leading to widespread famine. These floods were so severe that they caused untold suffering, displacing entire communities and plunging the region into chaos. In this time of despair, a figure emerged who would become a legend, Yu the Great. According to ancient Chinese lore, Yu was not just an ordinary man. He was a leader with an extraordinary sense of duty and compassion for his people. Yu was deeply troubled by the devastating impact of the floods. He knew that the survival of his people and the future of the land depended on finding a solution to this recurring disaster. Unlike others before him who had attempted to control the river through brute force and failed, Yu took a different approach. He decided to tackle the problem at its root by studying the river and its behavior. For years, Yu traveled tirelessly along the Yellow River, observing its patterns, the way it twisted and turned, and the points where it was most likely to overflow. He understood that to control the river, he needed to work with nature, not against it. Yu devised a grand plan to tame the river, one that involved redirecting its flow and building extensive infrastructure to manage its waters. He oversaw the construction of levees and dikes, massive earthen barriers that would contain the river's waters and prevent them from spilling over into the farmlands. Additionally, Yu engineered a series of canals and channels that diverted excess water away from populated areas, guiding it into safer regions where it could do no harm. The work was grueling and unrelenting. For 13 years, Yu led his people in this monumental task, often working alongside them in the mud and the rain, tirelessly dedicating himself to the cause. His commitment was so intense that he is said to have passed his own home multiple times during his travels, but never once stopped to rest or visit his family, as he believed the welfare of the people came first. Finally, after years of labor, Yu's efforts bore fruit. The floods were brought under control, and the once devastated lands were reclaimed for agriculture. The people, who had lived in fear of the river's wrath, were overjoyed. Yu was hailed as a hero, a savior who had not only protected their lives, but had also ensured the prosperity of future generations. The success of Yu's monumental project did more than just end the floods. It marked the beginning of a new era in Chinese history. His achievements laid the foundation for the establishment of the Xia dynasty, often regarded as the first dynasty in Chinese history, though its existence is debated by modern historians. Whether or not the Xia dynasty existed as described in ancient texts, The story of Yu the Great set a powerful precedent in Chinese culture. It established the principle that leadership and power should be based on merit, wisdom, and the ability to benefit the people. Yu, who had earned his authority through his deeds, became a symbol of what a ruler should be: selfless, hardworking, and just. This idea of merit-based leadership would resonate through Chinese history, influencing the way power was viewed and exercised for centuries to come. While Yu the Great was taming the Yellow River and laying the groundwork for Chinese civilization, significant developments were taking place far to the west in Mesopotamia. Around 1772 BCE, a region that is often referred to as the cradle of civilization, saw the rise of one of its most famous rulers, King Hammurabi of Babylon. Hammurabi is best remembered for his role in establishing one of the world's earliest and most comprehensive legal codes. At a time when societies were growing more complex, and the need for order and stability was becoming increasingly apparent, Hammurabi recognized that his kingdom required a clear and consistent set of laws to govern the behavior of its citizens and maintain social order. To this end, Hammurabi ordered the creation of a monumental stone slab, standing 7 feet tall and 2 feet wide, on which 282 laws were inscribed. This code, known as the Code of Hammurabi, was carved into the stone in cuneiform script, ensuring that it could be read and understood by the literate members of society. The laws covered a vast array of subjects, ranging from criminal justice to civil rights, trade regulations, and family law. Each law was carefully crafted to address the specific needs and challenges of Hammurabi's kingdom, providing a legal framework that would guide the actions of his subjects. Some of the laws were remarkably harsh by modern standards, reflecting the values and priorities of the time. For example, Law 1 decreed that if a man accused another of murder but could not prove it, the accuser would be put to death, underscoring the seriousness of making false accusations. Law 196 famously introduced the principle of retributive justice, stating, "If a man destroys the eye of another man, they shall destroy his eye," which has come to be known as an eye for an eye. This principle was intended to ensure that the punishment fit the crime, serving as both a deterrent and a means of exacting justice. Other laws, such as Law 197, dealt with the consequences of physical harm, dictating that if a man broke another's bone, his own bone would be broken in return. Law 199 addressed the treatment of slaves, specifying that if a man destroyed the eye of a slave or broke a slave's bone, he would be required to pay half the slave's value as compensation. Through these laws, Hammurabi created a society that was governed by a strict code of conduct, where the consequences of one's actions were clearly defined. However, the Code of Hammurabi also reflected the deeply entrenched social hierarchies of ancient Babylonian society. The value of an individual's life and rights varied greatly depending on their social class. Nobles, commoners, and slaves were all subject to the law, but the penalties and compensations prescribed by the code were different for each class. For instance, the law made it clear that the injury of a noble was far more serious and carried heavier consequences than the injury of a commoner or a slave. This lack of equality before the law is a stark reminder of the rigid social stratification that characterized ancient societies. While Hammurabi was laying down the foundations of legal governance in Mesopotamia, another significant civilization was rising in what is now modern-day Turkey, the Hittite Empire. The Hittites, who would become one of the major powers of the ancient Near East, were united under the leadership of Labarnas, a charismatic and ambitious ruler who reigned from 1680 to 1650 BCE. Labarnas had a clear vision: to unite the disparate Hittite city-states under a single centralized rule. The Hittites, originally a loose confederation of city-states, were known for their skilled warriors and strategic location at the crossroads of trade routes, but they lacked the unity needed to become a dominant force. Labarnas, recognizing the potential of a united Hittite empire, embarked on a campaign of conquest and diplomacy. He led his army across the region, capturing neighboring city-states and forging alliances with their leaders. His military prowess was matched by his diplomatic skills, as he was able to win over the hearts and minds of the people he conquered, integrating them into his growing empire. Labarna's rule marked the beginning of a new era for the Hittites. He established a centralized government and began the process of expanding the Hittite territory, pushing its borders ever closer to those of other powerful empires, such as Egypt. Under Labarnas, the Hittite Empire prospered. The territories under his control expanded, and the Hittites became known for their advanced use of iron, which gave them a significant advantage in warfare. Labarnas was revered by his people, remembered as a just and fair ruler who brought peace and stability to the region. His efforts laid the groundwork for the future expansion of the Hittite Empire, which would go on to play a crucial role in the history of the ancient Near East. While the Hittites were solidifying their power in Anatolia, a new cultural and political landscape was emerging in Europe, particularly in Mycenaean Greece. From 1600 to 1100 BCE, the Mycenaean civilization flourished on the Greek mainland, giving rise to a society that was both sophisticated and warlike. The Mycenaeans were organized into a series of independent city-states, each centered around a palace that served as the political, economic, and religious hub of the city. Unlike the centralized kingdoms of Mesopotamia or Egypt, Mycenaean Greece was characterized by its fragmented nature, with each city-state operating autonomously under the rule of its own king. Mycenaean society was highly stratified, with a powerful warrior elite at the top. This elite class was responsible for the administration of the city-states, the defense of their territories, and the conduct of foreign affairs. Beneath the warrior class were various levels of artisans, farmers, and laborers who supported the society through their work. The Mycenaeans are perhaps best known for their impressive fortifications and palaces, such as those found at Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos. These structures were not only centers of power but also symbols of the wealth and strength of the ruling class. The Mycenaeans also made significant contributions to the development of Greek culture. During this period, the earliest known form of written Greek, known as Linear B, began to emerge. This script was used primarily for record-keeping and administrative purposes, and its decipherment in the 20th century provided scholars with valuable insights into the workings of Mycenaean society. The Mycenaeans were also influential in the development of Greek religion, art, and mythology, laying the foundations for what would later become classical Greek civilization. Back in Egypt, a different kind of social structure was taking shape, one that was as rigid and hierarchical as the Great Pyramids that dominated the landscape. Ancient Egyptian society was organized like a pyramid, with a broad base supporting a narrow, elevated peak. At the base of this social pyramid were the peasants and slaves, who made up the majority of the population. These individuals were responsible for the hard, physical labor that kept the Egyptian economy running. They worked the fields, producing the food that sustained the population, and when the agricultural season ended, they were often conscripted to work on the pharaoh's massive building projects, including the construction of the pyramids. Above the peasants and slaves were the artisans, skilled craftsmen who created the art and architecture for which Egypt is famous. These stonemasons, sculptors, and painters produced the intricate carvings and grand structures that adorned the temples and tombs of Egypt's elite. The work of these artisans was highly valued, as it played a key role in expressing the religious and cultural identity of ancient Egypt. Next in the social hierarchy were the merchants, who were vital to Egypt's economy. These traders traveled the length of the Nile and beyond, exchanging goods like gold, papyrus, and linen with other regions. The Nile River was Egypt's lifeline, serving as a highway for commerce, and the merchants who navigated its waters were both respected and rewarded for their efforts. They facilitated the flow of goods and wealth throughout the kingdom, contributing to Egypt's prosperity. Scribes occupied an even higher tier in society, as they were the educated class responsible for recording and managing information. Scribes spent years in specialized schools learning the complex system of hieroglyphics, and their skills were essential to the administration of the state. They kept detailed records of everything from tax collections to grain supplies, and their work ensured the smooth operation of the government. Scribes were also tasked with documenting the lives of the pharaohs and the deeds of the gods, preserving the history and religion of Egypt for future generations. Soldiers made up the next level of the social pyramid. These men were the backbone of Egypt's military might, tasked with defending the kingdom from external threats and expanding its borders through conquest. Soldiers were often well-fed and enjoyed certain privileges, as their role was crucial to the security and power of the state. In times of peace, they might be employed in public works projects, but their primary duty was to protect the nation and its interests. Above the soldiers were the bureaucrats and priests, who held significant power and influence in Egyptian society. Bureaucrats, including the viziers who were second only to the pharaoh, were responsible for the administration of the government. They managed everything from the collection of taxes to the oversight of public works, ensuring that the state functioned efficiently. Priests, on the other hand, were responsible for maintaining the favor of the gods, which was believed to be essential for the well-being of the kingdom. They conducted rituals, managed the temples, and interpreted the will of the gods, acting as intermediaries between the divine and the earthly realms. At the very top of this social pyramid was the pharaoh, the supreme ruler of Egypt. The pharaoh was considered both a king and a god, the ultimate authority whose word was law. The pharaoh was seen as the mediator between the gods and the people, and his or her primary responsibility was to maintain Ma'at, the concept of cosmic order and harmony. The entire structure of Egyptian society was designed to support and sustain the pharaoh's rule, with every individual and institution playing a role in ensuring the stability and prosperity of the kingdom. This hierarchical structure was deeply ingrained in the fabric of Egyptian civilization, and it would remain a defining feature of the society for millennia. The social pyramid reflected the values and priorities of ancient Egypt, emphasizing the importance of order, stability, and the maintenance of tradition. Just as the Great Pyramids of Giza have stood the test of time, so too did the social and political structures that supported the pharaoh's rule, leaving a lasting legacy that would influence the development of civilizations across the ancient world. When a pharaoh died, he was not merely laid to rest. He was enshrined in one of the most awe-inspiring architectural feats of the ancient world: a pyramid. These monumental structures were not just tombs but sacred places where it was believed the pharaoh would eternally rule over the Egyptian empire in the afterlife. The construction of a pyramid was a colossal endeavor, involving vast resources and thousands of laborers, all orchestrated to serve the pharaoh even in death. Egyptian society was meticulously organized around this central idea. The pharaoh was the divine ruler, and every aspect of society existed to serve him. Taxes were levied on farmers, and a portion of their crops was taken to sustain the pharaoh and his massive projects, including the construction of these grand tombs. Artisans, skilled in their crafts, were employed to create unique and exquisite items for the pharaoh's use in the afterlife, ranging from elaborate jewelry to intricately designed furniture. Merchants played a vital role in this system, ensuring that the pharaoh was well supplied with the finest goods from across the known world, whether it was exotic spices, precious metals, or rare stones. Scribes, who were highly educated and respected members of society, followed the pharaoh closely, recording his words, thoughts, and deeds for posterity. They ensured that the pharaoh's legacy would be remembered, immortalized in inscriptions that adorned the walls of temples and tombs. Soldiers, ever vigilant, protected the empire from external threats and maintained internal order, ensuring that the pharaoh's rule remained unchallenged. Bureaucrats, the administrative backbone of the empire, carried out the day-to-day governance of the state, handling everything from tax collection to public works. They executed the pharaoh's will, ensuring that the empire ran smoothly and that the pharaoh could focus on his divine duties, including communicating with the gods. The pharaoh sat at the pinnacle of this complex hierarchy, not only as the earthly ruler but as the intermediary between the gods and the people, maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order, that was believed to be essential for the prosperity of Egypt. One of the most illustrious pharaohs to rule within this system was Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great, who reigned from 1279 to 1213 BCE. His reign was marked by extraordinary achievements, both in terms of monumental construction and military conquest. Under his rule, Egypt reached new heights of power and glory. Ramses II was responsible for orchestrating the construction of some of Egypt's most iconic structures, including the Temple of Abu Simbel, the Ramesseum, his mortuary temple, and significant additions to the Temple of Karnak. These grand projects not only demonstrated the pharaoh's power, but also served as lasting tributes to his divine status. Ramses II's military campaigns were equally impressive. He sought to expand the Egyptian empire and reclaim lands that had been lost during the reigns of previous pharaohs. His most famous military endeavor was his campaign against the Hittites, a powerful empire that controlled much of Anatolia and the Levant. The Hittite king at the time, Muwatalli II, reigned 1295 to 1272 BCE, was determined to challenge Egypt's dominance in the region. Muwatalli, following in the footsteps of his predecessor Labarnez, aimed to unify the world under Hittite rule and saw Egypt as a formidable adversary. The clash between these two ancient superpowers culminated in the famous Battle of Kadesh around 1274 BCE. Ramses II led his army, composed of 4 divisions totaling about 20,000 men, into battle, confident of a decisive victory. His target was the city of Kadesh, a strategically important stronghold on the Orontes River. However, unknown to Ramses, the Hittites were well prepared for the Egyptian invasion. Through espionage and strategic planning, Muwatalli II had fortified Kadesh with a massive force of 40,000 men. As the battle unfolded, Ramses made a critical mistake by splitting his forces, a tactic intended to flush out the Hittites, but which instead left his divisions vulnerable. Muwatalli seized this opportunity to launch a surprise attack, nearly trapping Ramses and his men near the river. The battle raged on, and historians believe that the Hittites could have decisively defeated the Egyptians at this moment. However, for reasons that remain a mystery, the Hittites did not capitalize on their advantage, allowing the battle to end in a stalemate. Despite the inconclusive outcome, the Battle of Kadesh was significant. It marked one of the earliest large-scale battles in recorded history and highlighted the military prowess of both the Egyptian and Hittite empires. After the battle, both sides recognized the futility of continued conflict and decided to pursue peace. Ramses II and Muwatalli II's successor, Hattusili III, eventually negotiated a peace treaty, which is considered one of the first in history. In 1258 BCE, the two great powers formalized their agreement, which read in part, Ramses, the great king, the king of the country of Egypt, shall never attack the country of Hutti to take possession of a part of this country, and Hattusili, the great king of the country of Hutti, shall never attack the country of Egypt to take possession of a part of that country. This treaty ushered in a period of unprecedented peace and cooperation between the two former enemies. The Egyptians and Hittites engaged in trade, exchanging goods and knowledge that benefited both civilizations. The Hittites, skilled in metalwork, taught the Egyptians advanced techniques for making superior weapons and tools. In return, the Egyptians, masters of agriculture, shared their expertise, which helped to enhance Hittite farming practices. This collaboration led to a period of prosperity for both empires, demonstrating that peace could indeed lead to mutual benefit and growth. Unfortunately, the peace between Egypt and the Hittites did not last indefinitely. Around 1200 BCE, the Hittite Empire began to crumble under the relentless attacks from the Sea Peoples, a confederation of naval raiders whose origins remain unclear. These invasions devastated the Hittite Empire, leading to its eventual collapse and disappearance from history. While the Egyptians managed to repel the Sea Peoples, the Hittites were less fortunate, and their once mighty empire faded into obscurity, leaving behind only the ruins and records of their once great civilization. As the Hittites were fading from history, on the other side of the world, a new civilization was beginning to take shape in what is now modern-day Mexico. The Olmec civilization, which flourished from around 1200 BCE to 400 BCE, is often considered the mother civilization of Mesoamerica. The Olmecs laid the foundations for many of the cultural and religious practices that would later be adopted by the Maya, Aztec, and other civilizations in the region. However, despite their significance, much about the Olmecs remains shrouded in mystery, primarily due to the difficulty in deciphering their hieroglyphic script. One of the most enduring legacies of the Olmec civilization is their colossal stone heads, 17 of which have been discovered in various locations across Mesoamerica. These massive sculptures, some of which stand over 3 meters tall and weigh several tons, are believed to represent the faces of Olmec rulers or other important figures. In Mesoamerican culture, the head was considered the seat of an individual's soul, emotions, and experiences, making these sculptures powerful symbols of the Olmec civilization. Although we may not know the names of the leaders they depict, the sheer presence of these stone heads allows us to glimpse the grandeur and mystery of a civilization that, while long gone, still resonates through the ages. As we turn our gaze from the Americas back to the ancient world of China, we find the Zhou dynasty rising to prominence in the period from 1046 to 256 BCE. The Zhou gained power following the decline of the Shang dynasty, whose rulers were seen as having lost the mandate of heaven, a divine right to rule that was central to Chinese political philosophy. The Zhou leaders promoted the idea that heaven granted the emperor the right to rule based on his virtue, but this mandate was not guaranteed forever. If a ruler became despotic or incompetent, he could lose the mandate, and a new dynasty could rise in his place. This concept of the mandate of heaven led to a cyclical view of history in China, where dynasties would rise and fall based on their ability to govern justly and effectively. The Zhou rulers used this mandate to justify their overthrow of the Shang and to legitimize their own rule. Under the Zhou, a new form of government emerged: feudalism. This system created another social hierarchy, with the king at the top, followed by lords, soldiers, and peasants. At the base of the social pyramid were the peasants, who were tied to the land and responsible for producing the crops that fed the entire empire. The soldiers, positioned above the peasants, had the crucial task of protecting the land from foreign invaders. The lords, who owned vast estates, collected a portion of the peasants' crops as taxes, which they then passed on to the king. In this way, the wealth of the empire flowed upward, concentrating in the hands of the king, who wielded immense power and wealth. This social structure was reinforced by philosophy, particularly towards the end of the Zhou dynasty, when Confucianism and Taoism began to take root. Confucius, a philosopher who lived during this time, developed a system of thought that emphasized respect, loyalty, and responsibility in all relationships. Central to Confucianism was the concept of Li, which refers to rituals, customs, and social conventions that maintain order and harmony in society. Confucius believed that by adhering to these principles, individuals could create a stable and just society. At the same time, another philosopher, Laozi, was developing Taoism, a philosophy that emphasized living in harmony with the natural world. Taoism teaches that individuals should follow the Tao, the way or path of the universe, by aligning themselves with the natural flow of life rather than struggling against it. One of the most famous concepts from Taoism is the idea of yin and yang, which represents the complementary and interdependent forces in nature, such as light and dark, hot and cold, or masculine and feminine. By balancing these opposing forces, individuals could achieve harmony and inner peace. These philosophical developments had a profound impact on Chinese society, shaping its values and social structure for centuries to come. The Zhou dynasty, with its feudal system and philosophical innovations, laid the groundwork for the development of Chinese civilization, influencing the culture, government, and philosophy of later dynasties. As we see from these various civilizations, whether in Egypt, China, or Mesoamerica, each developed unique social structures and philosophies that reflected their values and priorities. From the construction of pyramids and the rule of divine kings in Egypt to the feudal hierarchies and philosophical teachings of ancient China, these societies created enduring legacies that continue to fascinate and inspire us today. Confucianism and Taoism provided ancient Chinese farmers with a philosophical framework that made life more bearable. These philosophies emphasized living in harmony with nature and society, offering a sense of fulfillment and purpose in their daily lives. Confucianism, with its focus on respect, loyalty, and responsibility in relationships, helped to establish social order and stability. The concept of Li, which refers to the rituals and customs that govern social behavior, was central to Confucian thought, reinforcing the importance of maintaining harmony within the family and society. For the Chinese farmer, adhering to these principles created a structured and meaningful life, even in the face of hardship. Taoism, on the other hand, offered a different perspective. It taught that individuals should align themselves with the natural flow of the universe, embracing the Tao, the way or path that guides all things. By living simply and in accordance with nature, Taoism suggested that one could achieve inner peace and contentment. This philosophy encouraged people to let go of unnecessary desires and to focus on what was truly important, such as personal well-being and the balance of opposing forces like yin and yang. For farmers who were closely connected to the land, this philosophy resonated deeply, providing a sense of serenity and acceptance in their daily toil. As time progressed across the Mediterranean, the ancient Greek city-states began to rise around 800 BCE. These city-states, known as polis, were the centers of Greek political, economic, and cultural life. However, the land they occupied was largely infertile, with rocky soil that made large-scale agriculture difficult. The Greeks quickly realized that to sustain their growing populations, they needed to import essential staples, particularly grain. This necessity drove the Greeks to establish colonies throughout the Mediterranean and beyond, creating a network of city-states that spanned from modern-day Marseille in France to Rostov-on-Don in Russia. Among these city-states, Miletus was one of the most prolific, with over 90 colonies scattered across Europe. These colonies played a crucial role in producing food and other resources for the Greek mainland. The establishment of these colonies not only ensured a steady supply of grain, but also spread Greek culture, language, and political ideas far and wide, laying the foundation for what would later become the Hellenistic world. During this period of expansion, another city-state was beginning to emerge in Italy, Rome. According to legend, Rome was founded in 753 BCE by Romulus, who, along with his twin brother Remus, was abandoned by their parents and placed in a basket on the river Tiber. The basket eventually came to rest on the riverbank, where the twins were discovered by a she-wolf who nursed them back to health. As they grew up, the brothers decided to establish a city on the site where they had been saved. However, a dispute arose over who would name the city, leading to a violent confrontation in which Romulus killed Remus. Romulus then named the city Rome after himself, becoming its first king. While the Greek city-states were establishing colonies and developing their unique forms of government, a new power was rising in the East, Persia. The Persian Empire began to take shape under the leadership of Cyrus the Great, who reigned from 559 to 530 BCE. Cyrus is often credited with founding the Persian Empire, one of the largest and most powerful empires in history. The story of Cyrus's rise to power is steeped in legend. According to the tale, his grandfather, King Astyages of the Median Empire, had a prophetic dream that his grandson would one day overthrow him. To prevent this, Astyages ordered that the infant Cyrus be killed. However, the chief advisor tasked with carrying out the order spared the child, giving him to a shepherd to raise. Despite his grandfather's attempts to eliminate him, Cyrus survived and eventually fulfilled the prophecy. As a young man, he gathered an army and led a successful revolt against Astyages, defeating him in 550 BCE and uniting the Medes and Persians under his rule. Cyrus then embarked on a series of military campaigns that expanded the Persian Empire to unprecedented heights. He conquered Babylon, becoming the supreme ruler of Mesopotamia, and extended his control over the Indus Valley, creating an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the edges of India. Cyrus's conquests included the Greek colonies in Asia Minor, such as Ionia, bringing them under Persian control. His legacy was one of tolerance and benevolence, as he allowed the diverse peoples of his empire to maintain their customs, languages, and religions. This approach helped to maintain stability within the vast empire and earned him a reputation as a just and wise ruler. However, Cyrus's death left the empire in the hands of his successors, including Darius the Great, who would continue to expand and consolidate Persian power. Back in Greece, the city-states were growing in power and influence, with two in particular standing out: Sparta and Athens. Sparta was renowned for its military might and strict social order. The Spartans believed that every aspect of life should be dedicated to physical strength and warfare. From birth, Spartan children were subjected to rigorous scrutiny. If a newborn was deemed unhealthy, it was abandoned to die. Boys who were accepted into Spartan society were taken from their families at a young age and subjected to a harsh training regimen designed to mold them into formidable soldiers. This training included physical conditioning, weapons practice, and enduring severe hardships, all to prepare them for a life dedicated to war. Spartan society was divided into three main groups. At the top were the ruling aristocrats, who held political power and made decisions on behalf of the state. Below them were the free non-citizens, who were not allowed to participate in government but were expected to serve in the military. Finally, at the bottom were the helots, a class of enslaved people who provided labor and agricultural work for the Spartan state. The helots were essential to the Spartan economy, as their work allowed the Spartan citizens to focus exclusively on military training and governance. Life in Sparta was brutal, and the society's rigid structure left little room for anything other than preparation for war. In contrast, Athens was experimenting with a new and radical form of government, democracy. Athenian democracy was complex and, at times, chaotic, but it represented a significant departure from the monarchies and oligarchies that dominated the ancient world. Athenian democracy was characterized by two main institutions, the Council of 500 and the Assembly. The Council of 500, known as the Boule, was selected randomly through a process called sortition. Each of the 10 tribes of Athens was responsible for providing 50 citizens to serve on the council for 1 year. This random selection was facilitated by a machine called the clariterion, an intricate device that used tubes and balls to select the council members. The assembly, or ecclesia, was the larger body where all eligible citizens could participate in decision-making. Every male citizen of Athens who was not a slave and was born to Athenian parents had the right to vote in the assembly. The Council of 500 set the agenda for the assembly, which could consist of up to 30,000 citizens at any given time. The assembly would then vote on various issues, including laws, military decisions, and government policies. To maintain order during these often chaotic meetings, 9 presidents were randomly selected on the morning of each assembly to oversee the proceedings and ensure that the rules were followed. Despite its democratic ideals, Athenian democracy had its critics. The famous Greek philosopher Plato was one of the most vocal opponents of this system. In his seminal work, The Republic, Plato argued that true governance required wisdom and expertise, qualities that he believed were lacking in the randomly selected members of the Council of 500. He likened the role of a ruler to that of a skilled navigator, one who must study the stars, winds, and seas to guide a ship safely. Plato questioned how a randomly chosen individual could possess the necessary knowledge to govern effectively. Instead, he advocated for the concept of a philosopher king, a ruler who dedicated his life to the pursuit of wisdom, justice, and the common good. Plato's criticism of Athenian democracy reflects a broader tension that has persisted throughout history, the debate over who is best suited to lead. While Plato believed in the idea of a philosopher king, the reality is that every leader, from ancient emperors to modern politicians, often sees themselves as possessing the wisdom and insight necessary to rule. This tension between the ideal and the practical continues to shape political discourse and governance to this day. Meanwhile, not far from Greece, in the Indian kingdom of Magadha, another transformative figure was beginning his journey, Siddhartha Gautama, later known as the Buddha. Born around 500 BCE into a life of luxury, Siddhartha was a prince who had everything he could possibly desire. His father, the king, ensured that Siddhartha lived in a palace where all his needs were met, and he was shielded from the harsh realities of the outside world. The palace was a utopia, filled with wealth, fine goods, and endless pleasures. However, despite his privileged life, Siddhartha felt a sense of dissatisfaction and curiosity about the world beyond the palace walls. One day, he ventured outside the palace compound for the first time and was confronted with the realities of human suffering. He saw an old man, a sick man, a corpse, and an ascetic experiences that profoundly shook him. These encounters led Siddhartha to question the nature of life, suffering, and the true meaning of existence. Determined to find answers, he renounced his royal life and set out on a spiritual quest that would ultimately lead him to enlightenment and the founding of Buddhism, a religion and philosophy that would have a profound impact on millions of people across Asia and beyond. Siddhartha's journey from a life of opulence to one of spiritual seeking illustrates the universal human quest for meaning and understanding, a theme that resonates across cultures and time. The scene that Siddhartha witnessed had a profound impact on him. He saw an old man dying in the streets, and this sight shook him deeply. It made him realize that life was not the perfect and sublime existence he once thought it to be. Instead, he understood that death was an unavoidable part of the human experience, a truth that was similar to what Gilgamesh had discovered many years earlier. This realization was pivotal for Siddhartha, leading him to leave behind his life of luxury and embark on a journey in search of knowledge and enlightenment. Determined to find answers to the profound questions of life, Siddhartha spent many years studying with various spiritual teachers and engaging in intense meditation. His quest was not just about understanding the world, but also about achieving a state of inner peace and self-realization. After 6 years of dedicated searching, Siddhartha sat under a fig tree and meditated with unwavering focus. It was under this tree that he achieved a state of enlightenment, a profound realization and inner peace that transcended the limitations of the ego and connected him to a universal consciousness or divine essence. Enlightenment, as Siddhartha discovered, is not a static or permanent state, but an ongoing process of personal growth and development. It involves continuously deepening one's understanding and maintaining a connection with a greater reality. Siddhartha, who would become known as the Buddha, or the Awakened One, spent the rest of his life traveling and sharing his insights with others. His teachings and presence continue to inspire and guide many people toward their own paths of enlightenment. Meanwhile, in a different part of the world, the Persian Empire was under the rule of Darius I, who was determined to extend his empire further. After solidifying control over the city-state of Ionia, Darius set his sights on Greece. In 490 BCE, he dispatched a formidable army of 20,000 men to the city of Marathon, located 26.2 miles from Athens. The Athenians, who were significantly outnumbered with only 10,000 soldiers, faced a dire situation. Despite their disadvantage, the Athenians managed to secure a remarkable victory. They utilized their superior tactics to outflank and rout the Persian forces. The Greek hoplites, heavily armored infantrymen, crushed the Persian foot soldiers and pushed them back. The Persian army, demoralized and disorganized, fled to their ships and abandoned the battlefield. Historians estimate that 6,400 Persian soldiers were killed, while the Athenians lost only 192 men. The victory at Marathon was celebrated with great joy in Athens. A messenger named Phidippides ran the 26.2 miles back to Athens to announce the victory, an event that became immortalized as the world's first marathon. However, the Persian threat was far from over. Darius I's death did not end the conflict. His son Xerxes I took over and continued his father's ambitions. In 480 BCE, Xerxes led a massive invasion force of over 100,000 soldiers, intent on conquering Greece and avenging the Persian defeat at Marathon. The Greek city-states, despite their differences, united to face this new threat. One of the most notable confrontations occurred at the narrow pass of Thermopylae. The Spartan king Leonidas, with a small force of 7,000 Greek soldiers, took a stand against the overwhelming Persian army. Leonidas knew that his forces were vastly outnumbered, so he devised a daring strategy. Instead of waiting for the Persians to attack, he ordered his troops to launch a surprise attack on the Persian camp, disrupting their formations and catching them off guard. Despite this bold move, the Greeks were ultimately overwhelmed by the Persian forces, who attacked from multiple directions and broke through the Greek defenses. Leonidas and his men fought bravely but were ultimately defeated. Following the Battle of Thermopylae, the Greeks achieved a crucial victory at the Battle of Salamis. In this naval battle, the Persian fleet, consisting of 500 triremes, faced off against the 300 Greek triremes. Initially, the situation seemed bleak for the Greeks. However, the Athenian general Themistocles executed a brilliant strategy. He lured the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis, where the larger Persian ships had difficulty maneuvering. The Greeks managed to trap the Persian fleet and deliver a decisive blow, securing a vital victory that shifted the momentum of the war. Despite this setback, the Persian campaign continued. Xerxes I returned to Persia, leaving his general Mardonius in command of the Persian forces. In 479 BCE, the Greeks, now united under the banner of 30 city-states, assembled a formidable army of 110,000 hoplites to confront the Persians at the Battle of Plataea. Although the Greek forces were still outnumbered by the estimated 150,000 Persian troops, their disciplined hoplites and strategic use of terrain played a crucial role in the battle. The Greeks fought with determination and skill, utilizing the advantages of their armor and the terrain to offset the Persian numerical superiority. The battle was fierce and intense, with both sides exhibiting remarkable bravery. In the end, the Greek forces defeated the Persian army, inflicting heavy casualties and killing General Mardonius. The Battle of Plataea marked a turning point, ending the Greco-Persian Wars and securing Greece's independence from Persian domination. After the Persian Wars, ancient Greece entered a period of remarkable cultural and intellectual flourishing, known as the Golden Age of Greece. Freed from the immediate threat of Persian invasion, Athens, in particular, emerged as the epicenter of this cultural renaissance. The Athenians channeled their energy and resources into creating architectural marvels, with the Parthenon being one of the most iconic achievements. Perched atop the Athenian Acropolis, the Parthenon was more than just a temple. It was a symbol of Athenian power, wealth, and artistic achievement. This majestic structure, dedicated to the goddess Athena, dominated the skyline of Athens and remains a testament to the ingenuity and craftsmanship of ancient Greek civilization. Beyond architecture, the arts also flourished during this time. The city of Athens became a hub for the performing arts, particularly theater, which was deeply embedded in the religious and cultural fabric of the society. The city Dionysia, a festival held in honor of the god Dionysus, became the premier event for showcasing dramatic works. The state sponsored leading poets and playwrights to create tragedies and comedies, resulting in timeless works by figures like Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Aristophanes. These plays not only entertained but also explored complex themes such as morality, fate, and the human condition, laying the foundation for Western literature and drama. However, this period of cultural prosperity was not without its tensions. As Athens and Sparta emerged as the two dominant powers in Greece, their rivalry grew increasingly intense. Athens, with its powerful navy, led the Delian League, a coalition of city-states aimed at defending against Persian aggression. Sparta, known for its formidable land forces, formed the Peloponnesian League, a counter-alliance. The competition for influence and control eventually boiled over into the Peloponnesian War, a devastating conflict that would reshape the Greek world. The war began in 431 BCE, sparked by disputes over the city of Corcyra. Naval battles, such as the Battle of Sabota and the Battle of Pylos, highlighted the strategic importance of sea power in this conflict. By 421 BCE, a temporary truce known as the Peace of Nicias was negotiated, but it was fragile and short-lived. The Athenians, always ambitious, turned their attention to Sicily, hoping to expand their influence further west. Initially, the Sicilian expedition seemed promising, with Athens establishing alliances and winning minor victories. However, the recall of Alcibiades, a brilliant but controversial general, marked the beginning of the expedition's downfall. Without his leadership, the Athenians struggled against the well-fortified city of Syracuse, which received crucial reinforcements from Sparta. The expedition ended in disaster, with the Athenian fleet destroyed, thousands of soldiers killed, and many more captured and enslaved. The consequences of this defeat were severe. Athens, once the shining star of Greece, was left weakened and vulnerable. In the years that followed, Sparta, with the help of Persia, managed to finally bring Athens to its knees in 404 BCE. The long and costly Peloponnesian War left both Athens and Sparta significantly diminished, their former glory fading into history. The Greek city-states, now exhausted and fractured, were ripe for the rise of a new power. Meanwhile, far to the east, another ancient civilization was undergoing a period of significant change. The Zhou dynasty in China, which had ruled for over 800 years, was in decline. The mandate of heaven, the divine approval that justified the ruler's authority, was believed to have been withdrawn, leading to the collapse of centralized control. This ushered in the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE, a time of intense conflict and political fragmentation. Amid this chaos, new philosophical ideas emerged, including legalism, championed by Han Fizi. Legalism proposed that human beings were inherently selfish and that social order could only be maintained through strict laws and harsh punishments. Han Fizi argued that a powerful ruler, who wielded absolute control over the military, economy, and society, was necessary to enforce these laws and maintain stability. While China grappled with internal strife, across the globe in Mesoamerica, the Zapotec civilization was thriving in the Oaxaca region of present-day Mexico. The Zapotecs established their capital Monte Alban on a mountaintop overlooking the Oaxaca Valley. This strategic location allowed them to control the surrounding region effectively. Monte Alban became the center of a sophisticated society that was notable for its advancements in agriculture, including the cultivation of maize, which was crucial for sustaining their population. The Zapotecs also developed one of the earliest known writing systems in Mesoamerica, using symbols and glyphs to represent words and concepts. Their calendar system, based on a 260-day ritual cycle and a 365-day solar cycle, was another remarkable achievement, reflecting their deep understanding of astronomy and timekeeping. Back in the Mediterranean world, in the year 356 BCE, a child was born in the city of Pella in the Kingdom of Macedon who would change the course of history. This child was Alexander, later known as Alexander the Great, the son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. From a young age, Alexander was destined for greatness, and his education played a significant role in shaping his future. His tutor was none other than Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers of all time. Aristotle, who is often referred to as the father of logic, instilled in Alexander a love for knowledge and critical thinking. Aristotle's teachings spanned a wide range of subjects, from biology and taxonomy to philosophy and ethics, profoundly influencing Alexander's approach to leadership and conquest. When Alexander was just 20 years old, his father was assassinated, and he ascended to the throne. With a strong educational foundation and a fierce determination to preserve and expand his father's legacy, Alexander quickly asserted his authority. His first major act as king was to crush a rebellion in Thebes. In a display of ruthless efficiency, Alexander razed the city to the ground, killing thousands and selling the survivors into slavery. This brutal action sent a clear message to the rest of Greece. Alexander was a force to be reckoned with. With Greece subdued, Alexander turned his attention to the Persian Empire, then the most powerful empire in the world. In 333 BCE, Alexander faced the Persian army led by King Darius III at the Battle of Issus. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Alexander's superior tactics and the discipline of his troops secured a decisive victory. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving Alexander free to capture key cities, including Tyre, a strategically vital port that had resisted initial siege efforts. 2 years later, in 331 BCE, Alexander and Darius clashed again at the Battle of Gaugamela near the Tigris River in modern-day Iraq. Once again, Alexander emerged victorious, despite facing overwhelming odds. This victory effectively shattered the Persian army and led to the capture of Babylon, the Persian capital, and much of Mesopotamia. Alexander's conquests did not stop there. He pushed further east, defeating Persian forces in present-day Iran and Afghanistan. In 330 BCE, he captured Persepolis, a city known for its immense wealth and cultural significance, and symbolically burned it, marking the end of the Persian Empire. However, Alexander's ambition knew no bounds. He aimed to extend his empire even further, crossing the Hindu Kush mountains into the Indian subcontinent. Yet, his troops, exhausted and longing to return home, eventually refused to march any further. Reluctantly, Alexander agreed to turn back, marking the limits of his vast empire. While Alexander's campaigns were marked by incredible military success, they also paved the way for the spread of Greek culture across the known world. Wherever he went, Alexander established cities and promoted the ideas of his teacher, Aristotle, spreading Greek philosophy, art, and science. This cultural diffusion laid the groundwork for what would become known as the Hellenistic period, where Greek influence permeated much of the ancient world. However, Alexander's empire was short-lived. After his death in 323 BCE at the age of 32, his vast empire quickly fragmented. His generals, known as the Diadochi, fought among themselves for control, leading to the division of his empire into several smaller kingdoms. The most notable of these were the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in the east, and the Antigonid kingdom in Greece. Each of these successor states tried to carry on Alexander's legacy in its own way. The Ptolemies, for instance, made Egypt a center of learning and culture, with the Library of Alexandria becoming one of the most renowned institutions of knowledge in the ancient world. This library attracted scholars from all over the Mediterranean, fostering the exchange of ideas and contributing to the intellectual foundation of Western civilization. Philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, whose works were preserved and studied, would go on to influence countless generations, shaping the very essence of Western thought. Meanwhile, in the Indian subcontinent, the Mauryan Empire emerged as a powerful force, unifying much of the region under a single ruler. At its peak, the Mauryan Empire stretched across modern-day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and parts of Afghanistan. The most famous Mauryan ruler, Ashoka the Great, initially expanded his empire through conquest, but the horrors of war, particularly the bloody campaign against the kingdom of Kalinga, profoundly affected him. Ashoka, troubled by the immense suffering his conquests had caused, turned to Buddhism for solace. He embraced the teachings of the Buddha and began promoting non-violence, compassion, and respect for all living beings. Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism had a lasting impact on the Mauryan Empire and beyond. He issued a series of edicts, inscribed on rocks and pillars throughout his empire, that advocated for moral and ethical conduct, religious tolerance, and the welfare of his subjects. These edicts not only helped to spread Buddhism across Asia, but also left a legacy of a ruler who prioritized the well-being of his people over personal glory. In contrast, the Western world continued to glorify the warrior ethos, where dying in battle was seen as the ultimate honor. Alexander, though he died young, was remembered as a heroic figure whose conquests spread Greek culture far and wide, influencing the development of Western civilization. His legacy, along with that of his teacher Aristotle, laid the foundations for the cultural and intellectual traditions that would later be embraced by the Roman Empire and eventually shape the modern world. The death of Alexander marked the end of an era, but it also set the stage for new powers to rise. The cultural and intellectual achievements of Greece, now spread across a vast and diverse empire, would continue to inspire generations. In Egypt, the Ptolemies fostered a period of prosperity, with Alexandria becoming a beacon of learning and culture. The Library of Alexandria, in particular, became a symbol of the Hellenistic world's intellectual achievements, preserving the works of great philosophers like Plato and Aristotle and ensuring that their ideas would endure throughout history. As the ancient world transitioned into the Roman era, the seeds of Western civilization, planted by the Greeks and nurtured by their successors, would continue to grow, leaving an indelible mark on the world. While the general Seleucid was given the keys to the city of Babylon, Babylon at this time was a cultural hub, melting Greek, Persian, Indian, and Central Asian cultures. Seleucid, though, preferred Greek ideas and the Greek language. The Seleucid Empire was at its height during the reign of King Antiochus III, 223 BCE to 187 BCE. Under King Antiochus III, the Seleucids encompassed a vast territory from modern-day Turkey to modern-day Pakistan, one of the largest empires on record until the rise of the Romans. While the Antigonids did not have nearly as much success by the time Antigonus I took power, the Greeks were just a shell of what they once were. The age of the Greeks was behind us. The Ptolemies, the Seleucids, and the Antigonids went astray from the Roman Empire. However, for Rome to rise, it had to face a powerful foe, Carthage. Both Rome and Carthage had a desire for the same city-state, Messina, on the island of Sicily. This would give either civilization a foothold to grab power in the Mediterranean. The First Punic War was upon us, and after 20 years of fighting, in the year 241 BCE and the defeat of Carthage, the Treaty of Lutatius was signed. The peace, though, was short-lived. In 218 BCE, the Second Punic War began when the Carthaginian general Hannibal invaded Italy with his army, including elephants, to conquer Rome. Hannibal won several early battles, including the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE. Still, he was ultimately defeated by the Roman general Scipio Africanus at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. The war resulted in the complete defeat of Carthage, which was forced to cede its territories to Rome and marked the end of the Carthaginian Empire. There was no doubt in the world anymore that it was time for the Romans to take charge in the West. While in the East, after the end of the Warring States period, Qin Shi Huang and the Qin dynasty were an absolute power, 221 BCE to 206 BCE. Qin was determined to turn diverse China into a unified Chinese empire. He divided the lands into 36 command areas supervised by a governor, military commander, and imperial inspector. It was expected that they followed the will of Qin, or else they would face harsh penalties. The basic ideas of legalism in action: strong government, harsh laws, and the belief that humans were inherently selfish. However, their mandate from heaven ran out quite quickly after Qin Shi Huang's death. China was in turmoil with another dynasty on foot. Liu Bang became the leader of China from 206 to 195 BCE after leading a successful revolt against the Qin dynasty. He was then crowned emperor of the newly formed Han dynasty. Instead of adopting the strict legalistic policies of the Qin, Liu Bang chose to build his empire on the principles of Confucianism, which emphasized moderation, virtue, and respect for others. These Confucian ideals were spread throughout the empire, helping to create a strong and lasting dynasty. During the Han dynasty, silk production increased significantly, and the idea of making profits from silk trade became widespread. To expand trade, in 138 BCE, Emperor Han Wu sent an imperial convoy to establish contact with cultures in Central Asia and the Mediterranean. After establishing these routes, Chinese merchants began transporting silk along the Silk Road to the Middle East and eventually Europe, where it was sold at high prices. Initially, the trade route was relatively short. In 97 BCE, Ambassador Ganing was sent to Rome with gifts of silk to establish relations. However, he only made it as far as Mesopotamia. The Parthians, who were the dominant power in Iran at the time, misled Gan by telling him that the journey to Rome would take years. In reality, the trip would have been shorter, but the Parthians wanted to maintain their position as middlemen in the trade between China and Rome. They didn't want direct contact between the two empires, creating a situation where three powerful empires, Rome in the west, the Parthians in the middle, and China in the east, were positioned closely but without direct interaction. In 86 BCE, Greece, already weakened after the conquests of Alexander the Great, became the target of the Roman Empire. General Lucius Cornelius Sulla led his legions to Athens and laid siege to the city for several months. During the siege, he inflicted severe suffering on the people inside the city. When Athens finally fell, Sulla ordered his troops to loot and destroy much of the city, including many significant cultural treasures. This marked Rome's rise as a dominant superpower in the region, and Athens' power diminished, with Rome taking its place as the center of influence. In 63 BCE, General Pompey was tasked with capturing Jerusalem and the surrounding region of Galilee. The Romans quickly took control of these areas, including the small village of Nazareth, bringing them under Roman rule. But the Romans' ambition for expansion did not stop there. In 58 BCE, Julius Caesar was appointed governor of the Roman province of Cisalpine Gaul, located in northern Italy. His mission was to conquer the rest of Gaul, which was inhabited by Celtic tribes living in what are now France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland, Germany, and Italy. The Gauls, determined to maintain their independence, united under the leadership of Vercingetorix in a last effort to resist the Romans. In 52 BCE, Caesar led his troops to Alesia, where a decisive battle took place. Alesia was heavily fortified, surrounded by double walls, a ditch, and additional defenses on the hills. Vercingetorix had assembled a large force of Gallic warriors inside the town, while Caesar had gathered a substantial Roman army outside. Knowing that a direct attack would be difficult, Caesar decided to besiege the town and starve the Gallic forces into surrender. He ordered the construction of fortifications around Alesia, including a circumvallation wall encircling the town and another wall and ditch facing outward to defend against any attempts to break the siege. For weeks, the Roman forces engaged in a tough siege of Alesia, with heavy losses on both sides. The Gallic warriors inside made several attempts to break through the Roman lines but were repelled each time. The turning point came when a second Gallic army, led by Vercingetorix's ally Commius, attempted to break the siege. Caesar sent part of his forces to intercept these reinforcements. After a fierce battle, the Romans emerged victorious. Facing starvation and with no hope of reinforcement, Vercingetorix surrendered to Caesar, effectively ending the Gallic resistance to Roman rule. Over the next 2 years, Julius Caesar moved across the Gallic Empire, conquering and adding it to the Roman Empire. The Gauls were incorporated into Rome, and many even became Roman citizens. Despite Caesar's success in Gaul, the Roman Senate was not pleased. They were concerned about the growing popularity and power Caesar was accumulating. To curb his influence, the Senate ordered Caesar to step down from his military command and disband his army, warning that if he refused, he would be considered an enemy of the state. This put Caesar in a difficult position. He had to choose between obeying the Senate's orders or defying them, which would likely lead to a civil war. At the time, Roman law strictly prohibited any general from crossing the Rubicon River into mainland Italy with an army unless the Senate gave explicit permission. Crossing the Rubicon without permission was considered an act of treason, and doing so would clearly signal Caesar's intentions. Nonetheless, Caesar decided to march his army across the Rubicon, making war inevitable. Battles at Corfinium and Pharsalus soon followed, where Caesar proved to be a formidable opponent. As a result, the Senate appointed Caesar's son-in-law, Pompey, to lead the Roman forces against him. Both Caesar and Pompey understood the strategic importance of Spain, as it connected Italy to the rest of Europe. Their armies met near the town of Alerta in northeastern Spain. Despite being outnumbered, Caesar's forces managed to gain the upper hand by employing superior military tactics and training. After several days of fierce fighting, Caesar emerged victorious, forcing Pompey's troops to retreat. With this victory, Caesar established himself as the new leader of Rome. When Caesar returned to Rome, he was met with crowds chanting, "Hail Caesar! Hail Caesar!" The people then declared that he would be the dictator of Rome for life. Caesar immediately began implementing a series of reforms aimed at improving the lives of ordinary Romans and strengthening the central government. He oversaw the construction of new infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and aqueducts, which helped connect different parts of the city and boost trade. Caesar also introduced political and social reforms, such as granting citizenship to many people across the empire and establishing new laws based on Roman customs. He promoted the spread of the Latin language and culture and introduced the Julian calendar, which forms the basis of the calendar we use today. However, Caesar's rule was cut short. In 44 BCE, just 2 years after being declared dictator, he was assassinated by 2 senators, Cassius and Brutus, who had once been loyal to him. Caesar's murder plunged the Roman world into chaos, as various factions vied for control in the absence of a strong leader. Caesar's 18-year-old son, Octavian, then came to Rome to claim his inheritance and assert his place in the political arena. He quickly formed an alliance with Mark Antony, one of Caesar's trusted lieutenants. Together, they defeated Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE. However, tensions soon developed between Octavian and Antony, as both sought to control the Roman Empire. Their rivalry culminated in the naval battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian emerged as the decisive victor. Antony fled to Egypt with his lover, Cleopatra, and the two committed suicide the following year. With Antony's defeat, Octavian became the undisputed ruler of Rome. In 27 BCE, he was given the title Augustus and became the first Roman emperor. During Augustus's reign, a significant figure was born in the Roman-occupied city of Bethlehem. Jesus Christ, the Gospel of Luke recounts. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all went to be registered, each to his own town. Luke 2 verses 1-3. This census was crucial in Roman society, as it established population counts in various communities, allowing for taxation. As a result, the heavily pregnant Mary and her betrothed husband, Joseph, had to travel 90 miles on foot from Nazareth to Bethlehem to fulfill this legal requirement. When they arrived, Bethlehem was crowded with other descendants of King David and members of the Jewish faith also coming for the census. Finding no room at the inn, Mary and Joseph took shelter in a stable, where Mary gave birth to Jesus, who would later be called the King of the Jews. After Jesus' birth and the completion of the census, Mary and Joseph returned to Nazareth with their remarkable son. As Jesus grew, stories about him spread, and more people began to believe in him as their Messiah. They claimed that he could perform miracles, like catching an endless amount of fish, healing the blind, and that he was the Son of God. His followers, especially his disciples, began documenting his life and teachings. 4 of his closest disciples, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, wrote accounts that became known as the Gospels, covering much of the same events in Jesus' life. This narrative of Jesus' life, a child born in a stable who changed the world, became central to Christianity. Music, although Jesus was loved by many, others saw him as a threat. Augustus was succeeded by Emperor Tiberius, who ruled from 14 AD to 37 AD. Tiberius was known for his network of informants, called delators, who were rewarded for spying and reporting on suspected traitors and criminals. Those accused faced treason trials, often resulting in executions or forced suicides. Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea at the time, was well-versed in dealing with traitors. As Jesus gained more followers, he became a political threat. Following Emperor Tiberius's guidelines, Pilate had little choice but to order Jesus' execution by crucifixion. Under Roman law, defying the emperor's will was punishable by death. With Jesus' crucifixion, a new religion was born, Christianity. Initially, Christianity was just a small sect within Judaism, but its growth soon became unparalleled. Paul of Tarsus spread the message of Jesus Christ across the known world, traveling from Greece to Turkey to Syria. His missionary journeys, documented in the New Testament as the Book of Acts, helped spread Christianity. As Paul traveled, he gained more followers but also more enemies. The divide between monotheism and polytheism grew, making it increasingly difficult for Romans to accept a religious group that did not worship their gods. Like Mars and Jupiter. In July of 64 AD, a great fire broke out in Rome, destroying 2/3 of the city. Emperor Nero quickly blamed the Christians for the disaster. To fund the city's reconstruction, Nero imposed heavy taxes across the empire and began printing more Roman currency, leading to inflation for the first time in the empire's history. These new policies angered many people living under Roman rule outside of Rome, causing widespread discontent. In the ancient city of Jerusalem around 66 AD, a significant event was taking place. A rebellion was underway. This event, known as the First Jewish Revolt, initially saw success for the Jewish forces. They managed to catch the Roman army off guard, quickly pushing them out of the city. Encouraged by this victory, the Jewish rebels started gaining support in nearby villages in Galilee. However, this growing momentum caught the attention of the Roman Emperor Nero, who decided to send General Vespasian to deal with the situation. Vespasian, a seasoned military leader, advanced towards Jerusalem with a powerful army, forcing many of the rebels to retreat into the city itself. As the conflict progressed, Vespasian was declared emperor in 69 AD, and by the time Passover arrived in 70 AD, he had surrounded the city, cutting off its food and water supply. Inside the walls of Jerusalem, the Jewish people, under immense pressure, began to fight among themselves, weakening their defenses. By August of that year, the Romans broke through Jerusalem's defenses, killing a large portion of the population and destroying many of their sacred sites. the Jewish people suffered immense losses, and with their defeat, the influence of polytheism remained strong in the region. Meanwhile, between 98 and 117 AD, the Roman Empire was at its peak under Emperor Trajan. The empire expanded to its greatest extent, stretching from modern-day Britain all the way to the Persian Gulf. The Romans held dominion over much of the known world, although they had no knowledge of the Americas, where various civilizations were also thriving. In the Andes region, which corresponds to present-day Peru and Chile, the Moche civilization was known for constructing large, monumental structures like the Huaca del Sol and Huaca de la Luna. These pyramids were central to their religious practices, and the Moche people also developed advanced agricultural techniques, using bird droppings as fertilizer to enrich their soil. Their society was highly organized, with a strong, centralized government that dictated everyone's role in society. Further south, in the Nazca region, another mysterious civilization was making its mark. The people of Nazca created enormous geoglyphs, which are large-scale drawings on the ground. These geoglyphs included various shapes, animals, and human-like figures, created by removing the dark-colored stones on the surface of the desert, revealing the lighter earth underneath. These drawings, known today as the Nazca Lines, have puzzled experts for centuries, as their exact purpose remains unknown and is often the subject of speculation and conspiracy theories. Around the same time, in the region that is now Mexico, the Zapotec civilization began to establish its capital at Monte Alban. This city was one of the earliest examples of urban planning in the Americas. The city was carefully designed with a grid pattern of main roads and smaller streets, leading to plazas and public buildings. Monte Alban was divided into different districts, each serving specific purposes, such as residential, administrative, or religious activities. The city would continue to be used for nearly 1,000 years, a testament to its well-thought-out design. Back in Rome, after the end of Trajan's reign in 117 AD, a new emperor named Hadrian took charge. Hadrian faced the daunting task of maintaining control over the vast Roman Empire. One of his first challenges was dealing with unrest in Roman Britain. The people there, like those in Judea before them, were not pleased with Roman rule and began to rebel. To prevent a full-blown revolution, Hadrian ordered the construction of a massive wall, which came to be known as Hadrian's Wall. This wall stretched nearly from coast to coast in northern Britain, serving as a physical and psychological barrier to remind the conquered people that the Romans were firmly in control. However, in the Galilee region, peace was far from being established. A Jewish leader named Simon Bar Kokhba led a rebellion against Roman rule. The Romans were in the process of building a new city called Aelia Capitolina over the ruins of Jerusalem from the previous revolt. This new city was intended to honor the Roman gods, with temples dedicated to deities like Jupiter. Bar Kokhba's uprising began in 132 AD, and many Jewish people believed he was the Messiah who would liberate them and restore their independence. Bar Kokhba's forces launched a fierce attack on Aelia Capitolina, nearly wiping out the Roman garrison stationed there. But Hadrian would not allow this rebellion to succeed. He dispatched a massive force of 120,000 soldiers to Judea, determined to crush the revolt. According to the Roman historian Cassius Dio, the Roman forces destroyed 50 of the most important Jewish outposts and 985 of their villages. In the numerous battles and raids, 580,000 Jewish people were killed, and countless others perished from famine, disease, or fire. The devastation was so severe that nearly the entire region of Judea was left desolate. The Romans made it clear that they would not tolerate any challenge to their authority. While Rome was asserting its dominance, a different message was spreading in China. The teachings of Buddhism, along with the philosophies of Confucianism and Taoism, were gaining influence, helping to strengthen and unify the Han dynasty in various ways. On the other side of the world, in the Americas, the Mayan civilization was also making significant strides in architecture and religion. Mayan architects in northern Yucatan designed a series of broad temples with wide staircases, flanked by enormous masks made of stucco. These masks, crafted from plaster mixed with burned and powdered limestone, depicted the faces of deities. The Mayans believed these elaborate masks could capture the souls of the gods and bring their presence to the people. One such temple, known today as El Castillo, is a pyramid adorned with 16 of these stucco masks, each one providing a glimpse into the spiritual beliefs of the Mayans. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, a new empire was beginning to rise. A man named Ardashir claimed to be descended from the ancient Persian king, Cyrus the Great. Ardashir believed that he was the rightful ruler of Persia, not the Parthians who were currently in power. He managed to unite various Persian tribes and, in 224 AD, led his forces in a decisive battle against the Parthian king Artabanus V at Hormozgan. The Sasanian forces, known for their skilled cavalry, defeated the Parthians and captured their king. With this victory, Ardashir declared himself the ruler of a new Sasanian empire. Ardashir I quickly set about establishing a centralized government and chose Ctesiphon, located on the Tigris River, as the new capital. He also revived the Zoroastrian religion, which had been suppressed under Parthian rule, making it the official religion of the empire. Ardashir built a formidable military, with highly skilled cavalry and archers, and began expanding his territory by conquering neighboring regions. As the Parthians' power waned, so did the Han dynasty in China. The Han dynasty's decline was marked by internal political instability, economic troubles, external threats, and power struggles. The weakening of central authority allowed regional warlords to seize power, and the government's efforts to address economic issues were largely unsuccessful. A warlord named Qiao Pai eventually declared himself emperor and established the Wei dynasty, marking the official end of the Han dynasty. Back in Rome, the Emperor Diocletian, who reigned from 284 to 305 AD, faced the challenge of ruling an empire that had grown too large and unwieldy. To address this, Diocletian introduced a new system of governance called the Tetrarchy, which divided the empire into 4 regions, each governed by a separate emperor. Within this system, there were 2 senior emperors known as Augusti and 2 junior emperors known as Caesars. Diocletian appointed Maximian as his equal to serve as Augustus, while Galerius and Constantius were chosen as the Caesars. However, this system of shared power eventually led to chaos and anarchy as the various rulers competed for control. The story of Clovis and the founding of the Frankish kingdom is filled with drama and pivotal moments. As the Alemanni tribe began to defeat the Franks, Clovis, the Frankish leader, found himself in a desperate situation. In a moment of great need, he called out to the Christian God for help, promising that he would convert to Christianity if he emerged victorious. According to legend, a sudden thunderstorm gave the Franks the chance they needed to regroup and launch a counterattack. This unexpected turn of events led to a decisive victory for the Franks. True to his word, Clovis converted to Christianity, officially embracing the religion and establishing the foundations of what would become the Frankish kingdom. Meanwhile, as the Western Roman Empire fell, a new chapter was beginning in the East. Historians often debate whether the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, should be considered part of the Roman Empire or seen as the start of something new. However, under the leadership of Justinian I, the Eastern Roman Empire transitioned into what we now call the Byzantine Empire. Justinian, like many Roman emperors before him, was focused on expanding the empire's territories. He successfully extended Byzantine control into regions such as Italy, North Africa, and even parts of Spain. One of his most significant achievements was commissioning a team of legal scholars to compile and codify all Roman laws into a single document known as the Corpus Juris Civilis. This work became the foundation of European legal systems. Additionally, Justinian commissioned the construction of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, a magnificent cathedral adorned with intricate mosaics and marble decorations that became the heart of the Eastern Orthodox Church. In a different part of the world, another significant religious figure was emerging. In the small town of Mecca, a nomadic tribe called the Quraysh gave birth to a man named Muhammad, who would profoundly change the religious landscape. Muhammad was orphaned at a young age and raised by his grandfather and later by his uncle. As he grew older, he became a merchant, earning the nickname Al-Amin, meaning the trustworthy. In 610, during one of his meditative retreats in a cave on Mount Jabal al-Nur, the angel Gabriel appeared to him and relayed the word of God, instructing Muhammad to recite in the name of your Lord who creates man from a clot. Recite, for your Lord is most generous. These words became the opening verses of Surah 96 of the Quran. Initially hesitant, Muhammad was unsure of how to share this revelation. However, he eventually began to gather a small following. The early Muslims faced mockery and opposition from the pagan leaders of Mecca, particularly when Muhammad began to denounce idol worship. As tensions rose, Muhammad and his followers were forced to leave Mecca and migrate to Medina, a city 260 miles away. In Medina, Muhammad played a crucial role in ending civil wars and establishing a thriving Muslim community. The prosperity of the Muslim community in Medina soon attracted the attention of the Quraysh tribe, who, along with their allies, marched to Medina with a large army to attack the Muslims. Muhammad devised a plan to defend the city by digging a trench around its perimeter, making it difficult for the enemy forces to penetrate. For several weeks, the Quraysh forces attempted to breach the trench, but eventually, strong winds and heavy rain forced them to abandon the siege, marking a significant victory for the Muslims in 630. The Muslim army marched into Mecca, taking the city with minimal casualties. Muhammad offered amnesty to the leaders who had previously opposed him, leading to the conversion of most of the Meccan population to Islam. By the time of Muhammad's death, the Arabian Peninsula was united under the banner of Islam. After Muhammad's death, the leadership of the Muslim community passed to a series of caliphs, beginning with Abu Bakr, a close companion of the Prophet. Under the caliphs, the Muslim community continued to expand its territory, spreading the message of Islam far and wide. Abu Bakr first set his sights on the Byzantine Empire's provinces in Syria, successfully capturing key cities such as Damascus and Jerusalem in 636. Arab forces invaded the Sassanid Empire, capturing its capital in 637 and marking the end of the Sassanid Empire. The Muslim expansion continued into Egypt, where, after years of fighting, they defeated the Byzantines and captured the city of Alexandria in 642 AD, dealing a severe blow to the Byzantine Empire's economy. By 716, Arab forces had conquered much of North Africa, Carthage, and Spain, establishing a vast empire stretching from Lisbon to China. After consolidating their hold on the Iberian Peninsula, the Arabs launched raids into neighboring Francia, modern-day France. In 732 AD, they embarked on a major invasion to expand their territory northward. The Arab forces, led by Emir Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi, quickly conquered several cities, including Bordeaux and Tours. However, Charles Martel, the military leader of the Franks, assembled a large army to confront the Arabs. The two forces clashed near Tours on October 10, 732 AD, in a fierce battle that lasted several days, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. In the end, Charles Martel and the Franks emerged victorious, forcing the Arab forces to retreat back to Spain, thereby halting the massive expansion of the Arab Empire. While battles and wars defined the West, in China, during the Tang Dynasty, religions such as Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism coexisted peacefully. Citizens were free to follow the religion of their choice, leading to the construction of many temples and pagodas across the empire. The Tang Dynasty also witnessed the golden age of Chinese poetry, with poets like Li Pe and Du Fu creating works that became the foundation of Chinese literature. Li Pe wrote a poignant poem titled Zanzan on the Qingthing Mountain, which reflects the deep connection between nature and the human spirit. In Europe, Charlemagne, also known as Charles the Great, became the king of the Franks in 768. Charlemagne was a skilled military leader who expanded the Frankish Empire through successful campaigns, conquering much of Western Europe, including modern-day France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. He was also a devout Christian and worked tirelessly to spread Christianity throughout his empire. In 785, Harun al-Rashid was declared caliph, and instead of focusing on conquest, he turned his attention to scientific growth in the new capital city of Baghdad. Harun al-Rashid established the House of Wisdom, a library and research center that attracted scholars from around the world. These scholars translated ancient works and made significant contributions to fields such as algebra, chemistry, sociology, and the concept of infinity. While the Arab world was making advancements in science, the Vikings were pursuing a different kind of progress. The Vikings, a group of pagans from modern-day Scandinavia, sought to gain material wealth through raids and conquests. On June 8, 793 AD, the Viking Age began with a brutal raid on the small island of Lindisfarne off the northeast coast of England. Lindisfarne was home to a famous monastery and was considered one of Europe's most important centers of learning. The Vikings attacked the monastery, killing many monks and taking others as slaves, shocking the whole of Europe. In 799, Pope Leo III was attacked in Rome by a faction that accused him of tyranny and misconduct. The Pope fled to the Frankish kingdom, where Charlemagne provided an escort and restored him to the papal office. However, the power of the papacy was being questioned by many, leading Charlemagne to travel to Rome in late 800 to defend his pope. On Christmas Day, in the Basilica of St. Peter, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as the new Holy Roman Emperor, creating the Holy Roman Empire, or at least its first iteration. Under Charlemagne, the foundations of a great empire were laid, but after his death in 814, the empire began to face numerous problems. Charlemagne's son, Louis the Pious, 788 to 840, inherited an empire fraught with challenges. Many of his citizens viewed him as a devout Catholic with good intentions, but also as a weak leader who could not protect them from the Viking raids. The Vikings continued to attack cities along the Rhine River, sacking Catholic monasteries and destroying religious artifacts. As a result, local leaders began to focus on defending their own territories, rather than relying on the central government, which marked the beginning of a new system of feudalism. In this system, people willingly gave up their freedom to work on the lands of local leaders in exchange for protection from the Vikings. While the Holy Roman Empire was dealing with the Vikings, the Byzantine Empire faced its own challenges from the Arabs. In 820, Arab raiders landed on the island of Crete and gradually took control of it, completing their conquest in 827. The Arabs followed a similar pattern in Sicily and Sardinia, eventually conquering these islands as well. Meanwhile, in the Holy Roman Empire, after Louis the Pious died in 840 AD, the empire was divided among family members, leading to the famous Treaty of Verdun. The West Frankish Kingdom, which is now modern-day France, was given to Charlemagne's grandson, Charles the Bald. The East Frankish Kingdom, corresponding to modern-day Germany, was given to another grandson, Louis the German. The Middle Kingdom, which was sandwiched between the two, was given to Charlemagne's eldest son, Lothair, but it had a short lifespan due to its precarious position. The Vikings weren't just a problem for mainland Europe, they were also causing havoc in England. In 871, Alfred the Great became the King of Wessex, determined to protect his people from the Vikings. Alfred built a network of fortifications. In the late 10th century, the French nobility was choosing between two candidates to be their next ruler. One candidate was Hugh Capet, a nobleman who owned a lot of land in the region of Isle-de-France. The other was Charles, Duke of Lower Lorraine. With the help of Adalbero, the Archbishop of Reims, Hugh Capet won the election and became the first king of France, starting the Capetian dynasty. However, during this time in Europe, most people lived in fear because different civilizations were constantly trying to conquer each other. Everyone wanted more land and was ready to fight for it. This widespread desire for land and power led to the rise of feudalism across Europe, creating a new social structure. At the bottom of this structure were the serfs, who farmed the land and provided food for everyone. Above them were the knights, whose job was to protect the people. Then came the nobles, who ruled over specific territories and owned the land. The kings, who gave land to the nobles, were above them. At the very top was the Pope, who was believed to have a direct connection to God and was thought to have divine authority over all lands. In the early 11th century, a Norse explorer named Leif Erikson was sent on a journey to discover lands west of Greenland. If you look at a map, you'll see that west of Greenland is the Americas. Leif and his crew sailed to a new land they called Vinland, which is in what is now Newfoundland, Canada. They spent the winter there, building a small settlement and trading with the local indigenous people. They also explored the surrounding area, finding it rich in natural resources like timber, fish, and game. In the spring, Leif and his crew returned to Greenland, where they were celebrated as heroes for discovering new lands. Little did they know that they had discovered a new continent for the European people. At the same time, though less is known about the Americas during this period, historians believe that similar expansions might have been happening there. The Mayans in Central and South America were building impressive cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Chichen Itza, with populations between 2 and 10 million people. In North America, there were various tribes, including the Cherokee, Navajo, and Inuits. The Inuits were likely the ones who interacted with Leif's crew. Meanwhile, in Europe, in the Holy City of Jerusalem, there was a famous church called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. According to Christian beliefs, this church was built on the site where Jesus was crucified and resurrected. However, in 1009 AD, the Arab Caliph al-Hakim ordered the destruction of this sacred site, completely demolishing it. When the news reached Europe, Christians were horrified. Pope Sergius IV sent a letter to all churches, calling for a holy war to reclaim the Holy Land and expel the Muslims from the area. But before this could happen, the Arabs of the Abbasid Caliphate were overthrown by another group. The Seljuk Turks, a Central Asian Turkic people who followed the Muslim faith, were expanding their empire. In 1055, they took control of the Abbasid Caliphate's capital city, Baghdad. At first, they respected the caliph, but over time, they took over the city and expanded their control. In 1076, they captured Medina, followed the next year by the capture of Mecca, the holiest city in Islam. Because of these events, the Muslim world wasn't prepared when Pope Urban II, at the Council of Clermont in 1095, called on all Christians to take up arms and liberate the Holy Land from Muslim rule. The Pope promised spiritual rewards and forgiveness of sins to those who joined the crusade. Many knights, nobles, and peasants were inspired to take up the cause. Several European nobles, including Godfrey of Bouillon, Bohemond of Taranto, and Robert of Flanders, gathered their armies and set out for Jerusalem. While the Christians were united, the Muslims were divided, and they couldn't put up a strong defense against the Crusaders. As a result, the Christians took over the county of Edessa in 1098 and finally captured the holy city of Jerusalem in 1099. However, the Crusades didn't end there. In 1144, Muslim forces led by Turkish ruler Imad ad-Din Zengi launched a siege against Edessa. The city was poorly defended, and the Crusaders couldn't resist the Muslim forces for long. After several weeks, the city was breached and the Muslim forces overran it, killing or enslaving much of the population. The Christians weren't happy with this, so in 1147, a large army of Crusaders returned to try and retake Edessa. However, they faced many challenges, including shortages of food and supplies, as well as infighting and political rivalries. This caused their campaign to fail. After a disastrous defeat at the Battle of Hattin in 1187, where much of the Crusader army was destroyed, the Muslim leader Saladin was able to recapture Jerusalem. While Christians and Muslims were fighting in Southeast Asia, the Khmer Empire under King Suryavarman II built a magnificent temple called Angkor Wat for the Hindu god Vishnu. Vishnu is an important deity in Hinduism, known as the preserver and protector of the universe. He is often depicted with blue skin and holding for objects. As you approach Angkor Wat, you first see a large moat and a grand entrance gate decorated with carvings of mythical creatures and deities. The main temple rises like a towering mountain, with intricate carvings that tell stories of Hindu mythology and the history of the Khmer Empire. The temple's galleries are filled with stunning bas-reliefs showing scenes of battles, ceremonies, and daily life in ancient Cambodia. At the heart of the complex is the central sanctuary, a massive pyramid-like structure surrounded by smaller temples and courtyards. This sanctuary is considered the most sacred part of the temple and is adorned with carvings of Hindu gods and goddesses. Back in the Middle East, in 1187, Saladin, the Muslim commander from Egypt, became frustrated with Christian control of Jerusalem. He declared a holy war across the Muslim world to reconquer the city. The battle took place on a very hot day in the hills near the Sea of Galilee. Saladin's forces, numbering around 20,000, fought against a smaller crusader force of about 12,000, led by King Guy. The battle began with skirmishes but soon turned into a full-scale engagement. Saladin's forces, using their superior cavalry, managed to encircle the crusaders, who couldn't break through the Muslim lines. The heat and thirst took a toll on the crusaders, who became weak and disoriented. Saladin's forces then launched a fierce attack, breaking through the crusader lines and capturing many knights. King Guy and a small group of knights were able to escape, but the majority of the crusader army was destroyed. The loss of this battle was a severe blow to the Christian forces, and it allowed Saladin to recapture Jerusalem. However, the Christians weren't ready to give up. They launched another crusade, this time led by three of the most powerful monarchs of the time: Emperor Frederick I of the Holy Roman Empire, King Richard I of England, and King Philip II of France. They sent their best armies to try and recapture Jerusalem. But despite their efforts, they couldn't retake the city from Saladin, and the Third Crusade ended in failure in the 12th century. Genghis Khan was born in Mongolia. His birth was marked by unusual circumstances, as he was said to have been born clutching a blood clot in his right hand. Genghis had a difficult childhood. His father was poisoned by an enemy clan when he was very young, and his clan abandoned him, his mother, and his 6 siblings. Despite this, Genghis began making alliances with other clans in the Mongolian mountainside. By 1206, he had united all the Mongol tribes, bringing together about 1 million people. Genghis Khan was a progressive leader for his time. He made it illegal to sell or kidnap women, abolished the enslavement of Mongols, and allowed freedom of religion. However, he was also a fierce and ruthless warrior. His first campaign was against the Western Xia Kingdom in 1209. His army, mostly made up of cavalrymen on horseback, quickly overwhelmed and destroyed the kingdom. His next target was the Jin dynasty in China. From 1211 to 1214, the Mongols ravaged the countryside, causing food shortages that led the Jin army to kill tens of thousands of their own peasants to ensure the survival of the elites. In 1214, the Mongols besieged the Jin capital of Zhongdu, now known as Beijing, and burned it to the ground in the early 13th century. In England, King John faced increasing pressure from his barons, who were demanding greater rights and protections under the law. In response, King John agreed to meet with the barons and negotiate a settlement. The result was the Magna Carta, a document that outlined a series of rights and freedoms that the king could not violate. Among these rights were the right to a fair trial, the right to due process of law, and the right to be protected from arbitrary arrest and imprisonment. The Magna Carta also established the principle of habeas corpus, which requires the government to bring a prisoner before a court and provide a lawful reason for their detention. This principle has become a cornerstone of modern legal systems around the world. In 1217, another crusade was launched, this time led by King Andrew II of Hungary and Duke Leopold. The Christian forces were eventually compelled to end their campaign in Egypt. The Crusaders agreed to a treaty with the Muslim forces, which allowed them to leave Egypt safely but did not achieve their primary objective. Genghis Khan was far from finished, however. In 1219, he launched a war against the Khwarezm Empire, which is now part of modern-day Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. During his military campaigns, the Mongol army took control of several cities, including Bokhara, Samarkand, and Herat. Skilled workers, such as carpenters and jewelers, were often spared, while aristocrats and those who resisted were killed. Unskilled workers were frequently used as human shields during attacks. The exact number of casualties from Genghis Khan's wars remains unknown, partly because the Mongols promoted their fearsome reputation to spread terror. At the time of his death, Genghis Khan controlled an enormous area stretching from the Sea of Japan to the Caspian Sea. Remarkably, today about 8% of men in South Asia can trace their ancestry back to him. In 1228, Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire attempted to conquer the Holy Land but failed, marking the end of the Sixth Crusade. The Holy Roman Empire was not the only European power engaged in crusades. King Louis IX of France initiated the Seventh Crusade in 1248 with the goal of recapturing Jerusalem, but was captured by the Muslims and had to pay a substantial ransom. Despite this setback, King Louis IX made another attempt to liberate Jerusalem in 1270 but died of dysentery. Following his death, his forces retreated, concluding the Eighth and final crusade. Meanwhile, in England, significant diplomatic progress was being made in 1295. King Edward I summoned Parliament, asserting that since laws affecting everyone should be approved by everyone, common problems should be addressed with common solutions. Edward requested a tenth of the income from nobles and an 11th from knights, establishing one of the earliest forms of parliamentary governance in a new area in Africa. The wealthy ruler Mansa Musa was gaining prominence. During his famous Hajj, a pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim is expected to make at least once in their lifetime, Mansa Musa distributed vast amounts of gold to the poor. This caused a major inflation of gold in northern Africa. Upon returning to Mali, Mansa Musa dedicated himself to making Timbuktu a center of Muslim learning. He heavily invested in the construction of the University of Sankore, which attracted numerous Islamic scholars who came to study theology, law, and literature. With over 1 million manuscripts, Mansa Musa also commissioned the building of a new mosque every Friday, although only the Jingareb Mosque in Timbuktu has survived through the centuries. In the Americas, the Aztec civilization was flourishing. According to legend, the Aztecs were directed by their god Huitzilopochtli to build their city, where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus eating a snake. They saw this vision on an island in what used to be Lake Texcoco and founded Tenochtitlan there. Over time, Tenochtitlan developed impressive structures like the Great Temple, which consisted of two main buildings dedicated to the gods Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. The city featured a sophisticated system of canals and causeways to control flooding and facilitate transportation. The Aztecs also created floating gardens called chinampas in the shallow waters of Lake Texcoco, where they grew crops such as maize, beans, and squash. During the same period, England and France were embroiled in the 100 Years' War, which was sparked by disputes over the status of the Duchy of Guyenne. Although this territory was owned by the English crown, it was located in France. The death of the last direct descendant of Charlemagne, King Charles IV, in 1328, led to Edward III of England claiming the French throne in 1337. This claim was not accepted by the French, leading to the prolonged and tumultuous 100 Years' War. As the war continued, Europe faced a devastating pandemic, the bubonic plague. Italian poet Giovanni Boccaccio described the disease as causing swellings in the groin or under the armpits, which grew to the size of apples or eggs. Historians believe the plague spread through rats traveling on ships and via trade routes such as the Silk Road. The plague resulted in the deaths of 75 to 200 million people. The massive death toll, particularly among the poor, led to better rights and protections for surviving workers, including landowners in China. A rebellion led by the Red Turbans emerged against Mongol rule. Zhu Yuanzhang, who had come from a poor background, led the rebels and established himself as the emperor in 1368, founding the Ming dynasty and marking a new era in Chinese history. In 1428, Joan of Arc, at the age of 16, left her village of Domremy and sought permission from Charles VII to lead the French army against the English. Despite initial doubts, Joan eventually gained support and led the French to victory in the Siege of Orleans in 1429. This success boosted French morale and significantly altered the course of the war. Joan continued to lead French forces to more victories, but was eventually captured by the English in 1430. Accused of heresy and witchcraft, she was tried and found guilty, and was burned at the stake on May 30th, 1431, at the age of 19. 20 years later, Charles VII led a French army to victory at the Battle of Castillon, ending English claims in France. Back in Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire was in decline due to prolonged conflict, political instability, and economic problems. In contrast, the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Mehmed II was growing stronger. In 1453, Mehmed II led an army of 80,000 soldiers, including elite janissaries and powerful artillery, to besiege Constantinople. The Byzantine defenders, led by Emperor Constantine XI, were heavily outnumbered and outgunned. After 2 months of bombardment and damage to the city's walls, the Ottomans launched a final assault on May 29, 1453. They breached the walls and captured the city, bringing an end to the Byzantine Empire and marking the beginning of Ottoman dominance in the region. Meanwhile, in Russia, the Mongol Empire was losing control. In 1472, Ivan the Great refused to pay tribute to the Mongols. Over the next several years, he built up his military strength, eventually driving Mongol forces from various Russian cities. By 1480, after a tense standoff, the Mongols retreated, leading to the emergence of an independent Russia and the decline of the Mongol Empire in 1492. Christopher Columbus embarked on a voyage to find a route to India but instead landed in the Bahamas, on an island he named San Salvador. There, he and his crew encountered the Lucayans, who welcomed them and provided supplies. Back in Europe, the Renaissance was flourishing. In 1503, Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa, which his biographer Walter Isaacson described as an extraordinary emotional painting due to its mysterious smile, resulting from Leonardo's understanding of optics and anatomy. In 1504, Michelangelo sculpted David, describing his process as revealing the statue within the marble, perfecting its form through his skillful carving. In 1506, while Michelangelo was working on his magnificent painting for the Sistine Chapel, Niccolò Machiavelli was making waves in the political world with his influential work, The Prince. This book is a significant piece of political literature that analyzes past civilizations. Machiavelli argued that it is safer for a ruler to be feared rather than loved. He explained that love is dependent on obligations, which people often break when it benefits them, whereas fear of punishment is a more reliable means of maintaining control. Consider a typical farmer, for example. Farmers often work hard and pay heavy taxes to a noble lord who, in return, provides protection. The farmers do not rebel against this arrangement because they fear the consequences of losing their protection. Without their leaders, they could be vulnerable to attacks from groups like the Huns or Mongols. Thus, their fear of potential danger compels them to continue supporting their leaders. Martin Luther, however, sought to make a significant change and was disillusioned with the Catholic Church. At that time, the Church was selling indulgences, which were certificates people could buy to reduce their time in purgatory after death. Luther saw this practice as corrupt and against the Bible's teachings, which stressed repentance and faith over material wealth. To protest, Luther wrote his 95 Theses, arguing against the Church's practices and calling for reform. On October 31, 1517, he posted his 95 Theses on the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, a common way to start a public debate. His actions sparked widespread debate among church leaders and scholars. Some supported his criticisms, while others considered him a heretic and a threat. This marked the beginning of Protestantism. In 1519, Spanish conquistadors led by Hernán Cortés arrived on the shores of the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs, believing the Spaniards were messengers of their god Quetzalcoatl, welcomed them with gifts of gold and silver. However, Cortés soon revealed his true aim to conquer the Aztec Empire and seize its wealth for Spain. Over the following years, Cortés and his men fought fiercely against the Aztecs, utilizing advanced weaponry such as guns and cannons and forming alliances with indigenous groups who were enemies of the Aztecs. Despite being greatly outnumbered, the Spanish forces made significant progress and eventually besieged the Aztec capital city. After months of conflict, the city fell to the Spanish in 1521, leading to the fall of the Aztec Empire. Following Cortés's strategy, Francisco Pizarro led an expedition that conquered the Incan Empire in what is now Peru. The violence and authoritarianism were severe, but the impact of disease was even more devastating. Europeans, having developed immunity to illnesses like the bubonic plague and smallpox, unintentionally spread these diseases to the native populations, causing widespread death and destruction. Under the leadership of Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire became a dominant and influential power. Suleiman was known for his strategic and military prowess. By the end of his reign, the empire extended from southeastern Europe to the Arabian deserts and from the Mediterranean shores to the Persian plains. Suleiman's conquests included major cities like Belgrade, Budapest, Jerusalem, and Mecca, and the Ottomans established naval dominance in the Mediterranean, controlling North African cities such as Algiers and Tunis. In contrast, King Henry VIII of England faced personal and political dilemmas. He was deeply in love with Anne Boleyn but could not marry her while his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was still alive, as the Catholic Church did not recognize divorce. To resolve this, Henry broke away from the Catholic Church and established the Church of England with himself as the head. In 1534, he passed the Act of Supremacy, declaring himself the supreme head of the Church of England and causing a schism with the Catholic Church. This led to Henry's excommunication and a lasting division between the two churches. In Russia, Ivan the Terrible became the ruler. In his early years, Ivan achieved success by expanding Russia's borders and overseeing grand public works like the construction of St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow. However, as he aged, Ivan became increasingly paranoid and erratic. He launched brutal purges and executions against those he saw as threats. His personal loss of his beloved wife, Anastasia, in 1560 seemed to trigger a psychological breakdown, leading to more violence. Ivan's infamous Oprichnina, a campaign of terror and repression, resulted in thousands of deaths and widespread destruction. As Russia faced internal turmoil, England was flourishing with the start of the English Renaissance under Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabethan playwrights made significant contributions to literature, producing works that were poetic and profound. William Shakespeare, for instance, wrote plays such as Julius Caesar, about Caesar's assassination, King John, focusing on the 100 Years' War, and Henry VII, exploring the quest for power. Other notable playwrights included Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, and John Webster. Across the Atlantic, the English colony of Jamestown was established in Virginia by the Virginia Trading Company. Further north, Samuel de Champlain founded the French colony of Quebec in Canada. Meanwhile, Europe was embroiled in the 30 Years' War, which began in 1618 when the Holy Roman Emperor attempted to impose Catholicism on the Protestant population of Bohemia. The conflict spread throughout Europe, resulting in widespread destruction and devastation. The war involved major powers such as France, Spain, Sweden, and the Holy Roman Empire, and was driven by religious, political, and economic factors. It concluded in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, which recognized Dutch independence, established state sovereignty within the Holy Roman Empire, and ended the religious conflicts in China. The Ming dynasty faced internal problems of corruption and factionalism. The reigning emperor, Chongzhen, struggled to address the Manchu threat due to infighting among officials and a lack of resources. In 1644, the Manchu army, led by Prince Dorgan, invaded China. The Ming army, weakened by neglect and corruption, could not withstand the Manchu forces. Beijing was quickly conquered, and the Manchus installed their own emperor, ending the Ming dynasty and continuing the cycle of dynasties in China. In 1700, King Charles II of Spain died without an heir, creating a political crisis over who should inherit the Spanish throne. King Louis XIV of France supported his grandson Philip as the rightful heir, hoping to secure French influence over Spain. Conversely, Emperor Leopold I of Austria backed Archduke Charles of the Habsburg dynasty, seeing him as a potential ally against French expansion. This disagreement led to a major war involving many European powers. The conflict concluded with the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, which recognized Philip as King of Spain but required him to renounce any claim to the French throne and cede territories to Britain and Austria. The Treaty of Rastatt, signed the following year, officially ended the war. In 1707, the Parliaments of England and Scotland passed the Acts of Union, which merged the two separate kingdoms into one united political entity called Great Britain. This act laid the foundation for the legal existence of Great Britain. However, Scotland was unhappy with this union, leading to protests and uprisings in the years that followed. Notably, the Jacobite risings of 1715 and 1745 occurred, with the goal of restoring Scottish monarchy and independence. Fast forward to July 4th, 1776. A group of American patriots gathered in Philadelphia to sign a crucial document. This document declared fundamental truths such as the belief that all men are created equal and are endowed with certain unalienable rights including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This declaration marked the beginning of the American War of Independence. At the same time, in Europe, the atmosphere was quite different. Adam Smith published his influential book, The Wealth of Nations, which laid the groundwork for laissez-faire economics. This economic theory suggests that markets naturally regulate themselves over time without interference. Meanwhile, in Austria, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was performing his renowned work, the Hafner Serenade. This piece is known for its charming and elegant style, featuring graceful melodies and refined instrumental arrangements. As the war in America continued, King George III sent large numbers of British soldiers to the colonies. Despite the colonists' lack of formal military training, their knowledge of the local terrain and guerrilla tactics made them difficult targets. On the other hand, the British soldiers, easily recognizable in their red coats, were more visible. In the summer of 1781, American General George Washington, alongside French General Rochambeau, marched their troops to Virginia. There, they laid siege to British General Cornwallis and his army at Yorktown. The British forces found themselves trapped with no way to escape by land or sea. The siege lasted for weeks, with American and French forces continuously bombarding the British with artillery. They also dug trenches to gradually approach British defenses. The French Navy played a crucial role by defeating the British Navy in a key naval battle off the coast of Virginia, cutting off Cornwallis's last escape route by sea. On October 14, 1781, the American and French forces launched a major assault on the British defenses. Although the British fought bravely, they were outnumbered and outgunned, leading to their surrender on October 19, 1781. This victory at Yorktown marked a decisive turning point in the war, ending British rule in America and beginning a new era for the fledgling nation. With America now free from British control, there was a pressing question. How should the new nation be governed? The choice was made to establish a democracy rather than a monarchy. However, there was a concern about whether ordinary citizens were capable of choosing the best leaders. To address this, the Constitutional Convention proposed the Electoral College system. Under this system, citizens would vote for electors who would then vote for the president, rather than having the president chosen directly by the public. Meanwhile, the French were inspired by the American Revolution. At that time, France was ruled by King Louis XVI and his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette. Queen Marie Antoinette's infamous remark, "Let them eat cake," showed her disregard for the common people, leading to widespread discontent. The French people sought more influence over their governance and formed the National Assembly to create new laws that would grant them more rights. One significant event was the storming of the Bastille, a prison that symbolized the king's power. The people's attack on the Bastille and the release of prisoners marked the beginning of the French Revolution. During this period, many influential figures, including King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, were executed. The French people were eager to replace the old monarchy with a system that gave everyone a voice. Maximilien Robespierre emerged as a key figure in the revolution. Elected as a delegate to the Estates General in 1789, Robespierre became a leading advocate for the rights of ordinary people and opposed the power of the aristocracy. As the revolution progressed, Robespierre's views became more radical, leading to the execution of King Louis XVI and the establishment of a republic. In 1793, Robespierre was appointed to the Committee of Public Safety, which was responsible for protecting the revolution and eliminating its enemies. This period, known as the Reign of Terror, saw thousands of people arrested, tried, and executed for perceived crimes against the revolution. Robespierre became known for his ruthless methods, but as the violence and instability continued, public support for him waned. In 1794, Robespierre and his closest allies were arrested and executed by guillotine on July 28, ending the Reign of Terror and leading to a shift in French governance. The new government, known as the Directory, was led by a 5-member executive council chosen by the Council of Elders. This legislative body was part of the new government structure and aimed to balance the interests of various factions. However, the Directory's effectiveness was limited. General Napoleon Bonaparte eventually overthrew the Directory and began his campaigns to expand his influence across Europe. In 1805, Napoleon defeated a combined Austro-Russian army at the Battle of Austerlitz, solidifying his power in Europe. He then conquered much of the continent, including Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands. In 1812, Napoleon launched a disastrous invasion of Russia. His army suffered greatly due to the harsh winter, marking the beginning of his downfall. By 1814, European powers had allied against Napoleon and invaded France, forcing him to abdicate and go into exile on the island of Elba. Napoleon briefly returned to power in 1815 during the 100 Days before being defeated by British and Prussian forces at the Battle of Waterloo. While these events unfolded in Europe, Simón Bolívar was leading military campaigns to liberate Latin American countries from Spanish colonial rule. Bolívar began his efforts in Venezuela in 1810, successfully leading an uprising against Spanish authorities. He then moved to Colombia, where he won crucial victories, including the Battle of Boyacá in 1819, securing Colombia's independence. Bolívar continued his campaign in Ecuador and Peru, winning decisive battles and capturing Lima in 1824, effectively ending Spanish control in Peru. His final campaign was in Bolivia, where he led the fight for independence in 1825. Bolivia was named in honor of Bolívar, who played a critical role in its liberation. In 1848, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published the Communist Manifesto, which introduced the idea of communism. The manifesto proposed a system where the working class or proletariat would own the means of production and work together, as opposed to the capitalist system where the bourgeoisie controlled everything and the workers were exploited. Marx and Engels wrote that the ruling classes should fear a revolution, as the proletarians had nothing to lose but their chains and had everything to gain. They also noted that the need for expanding markets drove the bourgeoisie to spread their influence globally, creating connections everywhere. Following the publication of the Communist Manifesto, Europe entered a period known as the Scramble for Africa. Starting in the 1870s, European nations began exploring the interior of Africa to claim new territories and resources. Initially, European powers approached Africa cautiously, sending explorers and missionaries to establish trade networks and alliances with local leaders. However, as competition intensified, European powers became more aggressive, using military force to establish colonies and protectorates. They also engaged in diplomatic maneuvers and propaganda to gain local support. One of the most aggressive tactics was drawing artificial borders and creating new ethnic and linguistic divisions, which led to conflicts among African groups. This allowed European powers to maintain control over Africa and maximize profits. The scramble for Africa eventually ended due to changing international politics, economic realities, and rising African nationalism. By the early 20th century, European nations became more focused on internal competition and the impending outbreak of World War I, which began on June 28, 1914, with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. This assassination, carried out by a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip, triggered a diplomatic crisis that escalated into a global conflict. After the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. This action set off a chain reaction of alliances and treaties that drew multiple countries into the conflict. Germany, which was allied with Austria-Hungary, declared war on both Russia and France. Meanwhile, Great Britain, which had a treaty with Belgium, declared war on Germany. Within a few weeks, most of Europe was involved in a severe and devastating war. In November 1918, after 4 years of intense fighting, the Allied powers and the Central Powers agreed to an armistice, which effectively ended the fighting and marked the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. The armistice took effect on November 11th, leading to the cessation of hostilities across Europe. The peace was not to last long. Adolf Hitler, similar to historical figures like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Trajan, Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Suleiman the Great sought to build a vast empire for his nation and people. Hitler envisioned creating an empire that would surpass any that had ever existed, aiming to make even the Roman Empire seem insignificant. However, his ambitions brought immense suffering, particularly to those he deemed undesirable. In April 1945, Soviet forces launched a major attack on Berlin. After weeks of fierce fighting, Berlin fell on May 2nd, and German forces surrendered. At the same time, Allied forces were advancing from the west. On May 7th, Germany signed an unconditional surrender, officially ending the war in Europe. A few months later, after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan also surrendered, bringing an end to World War II. Following World War II, the world entered a period of rapid technological advancement. Alan Turing's development of the computer marked the beginning of a technological revolution. The world became more interconnected, and for the next 50 years, the United States and the Soviet Union were engaged in a Cold War, despite being on different continents. In 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first person to land on the moon, marking a significant achievement in human history. Over the years, the world has continued to shrink as computers have become more affordable and cell phones have revolutionized communication. Returning to the ancient tale of Gilgamesh, we see that in his quest for immortality, Gilgamesh learns a profound truth. Life is elusive and cannot be grasped. The gods granted humans death as their portion and kept life in their own hands. The history of human civilizations is an ever-evolving narrative, continuously updated. Although some aspects remain constant, such as the inevitability of death and the rise and fall of empires, the search for safety and stability is a perennial human pursuit.
If you enjoyed this exploration, please subscribe and share with your friends. Stay tuned for more fascinating stories from the cradle of civilization. Until next time, keep uncovering the mysteries of the past and letting the legends inspire your future.